Thank you so much. It's really a privilege to be here. The first thing I was excited about when I found that I would be speaking tonight was to realize that it's tonight that we turn our clocks back an hour, which means that I have an extra hour to speak. No, not going to happen. You know, I'm privileged to do a lot of different things. One of the things that I get to do is we have a book line called Barna Books, which is produced and distributed by Tyndale House Publishers. And we put out a lot of kinds of books, but one of the implications of having that line of books is that I receive a lot of unsolicited manuscripts. And you've heard the expression, don't judge a book by its cover. I have to tell you, as a publisher, so to speak, it's very hard not to judge a potential manuscript by its title. And so we get all these potential manuscripts that come in. The first thing you see is the title, and there are a lot of them that you just read the title and you think, there is no way. And you don't even bother reading any further. And you know, some people challenge me on that. I thought I'd share some of that with you. We get two different types of titles, it seems. We get some authors who are trying to ride on the back of other successful books, and so their title really builds on somebody else's success. We get other titles that are a bit more creative. But I want you to put yourself in my shoes now and tell me, if you had the chance, would you publish some of these books? So we got one that was titled, Baptists are from Mercury, Episcopalians are from Uranus. It's, you know, didn't make the cut. We had another one, the Purpose-Driven Handbell Choir. Not for Barna Books, I'll tell you that. Left Behind, Right Behind, Two Views of the End. You know, it's, we had another one, Bad Girls of the Choir. And then there was the 5 love languages of the jihad, and we chose not to go with that. Now, we had some books that had more creative titles. We still chose not to run with them. One of those was The Church Administrator's Guide to Lovingly Blocking Change. Hit a little too close to home. We thought we wouldn't do that. Another one was How to Lead an Elder Board, Getting the Most Out of 5-Hour Meetings. There was yet another one that came across our desk there, and that was Wheeling and Dealing and Healing. Just didn't think that would work. And then we had, finally, Profiles of Revered Southern Baptist Women Preachers, a short story. I kind of like that one, but the page count didn't work. So anyway, it's an interesting life. I'm very grateful, Carson, to you and the entire Arrow team for inviting me to be here tonight. It's a privilege to share a few minutes and some thoughts with all of you, particularly in connection with Arrow leadership, which my wife and I have been big supporters of for well over a decade. I believe wholeheartedly in what Arrow is doing. I've been fortunate over the course of time to conduct research over more than 30 years related to a wide range of issues and conditions, and have worked with a wide range of leaders in a diverse set of fields such as government, media and technology, military, ministry, business, education, entertainment. And drawing on all of that experience, I've become convinced that the quality of leaders who serve us is vitally important to determining our future. I believe we need great leaders now more than ever, and I think there are some very convincing reasons for making an audacious statement like that. Let me share some of those with you. The first of those reasons is that, frankly, the world is becoming increasingly complex. I think we need leaders who can help us to make sense of the intricacies and the dangers of modern living. If you look at many of the things that are taking place today, some of the indicators of that complexity would include the global integration that's taking place, not only across economies, but you look at the movement of people, the travel that takes place, you look at government policies, environmental choices, even look at the way relationships are being developed these days through Facebook, Twitter, many other technologies where now people have international friends. You look at the changes in technology that are taking place, take a look at the time crunch that almost all of us experience from day to day, where we're being asked to make decisions faster and faster, in spite of the stress of doing that and the fragmented schedules that we have. You look at all of the information that we're expected to deal with, it just floods over us, and we're supposed to be able to make sense of it without falling prey to analysis paralysis. And then you look at the fact that our nation's populations are becoming increasingly segmented, all these different niche cultures that we have, whether those are cultures that relate to ethnicity or generations or geographic regions or spirituality or economics, each of those demanding its own ways, its own special handling. It's very complex. We need leaders who can come alongside us and help make sense out of all of this. Secondly, we need more great leaders today because people are becoming more self-absorbed and more selfish. We need leaders who can motivate us to adjust our perspectives and our commitments. If you look at what's happening that drives that move towards selfishness, what you find is that increasingly people expect everything in their life to be customized to their own needs, desires, and preferences and tastes. And so whether we're talking about consumer products or media content or the forms of communication that they choose to communicate their thoughts and ideas, their needs and desires, all of that, they want to be customized. You look at the lack of commitment that most people now have to the common good. What people mostly commit themselves to these days is self-interest, whether that comes in the form of voting or ideology or other kinds of lifestyle choices. You look at the kind of communications that dominate the landscape today, and an increasing proportion of them are really focused on self. They're dominated by opinions. Fact is a thing of the past. You look at the hyper-individualism of our culture today. What you have are individuals who want no kind of external restrictions placed upon them, where they have no sense of communal responsibility or commitment. And of course, we did a study not too long ago, we do this every once in a while, where we look at people's self-image. And we ask people, how do you think of yourself? If you had to describe the major ways in which you think of yourself as a human being, how would you describe yourself? Number one on the list, would they describe themselves as an individual, one who thinks and needs to be treated like a unique person. Secondly, they thought of themselves as consumers. Third, they thought of themselves as parents or spouses. Fourthly, a career person. Fifthly, a citizen. Sixthly, a Christian. So you look at that ordering, that hierarchy of self-determination, and that's kind of frightening in and of itself. We need leaders who can help us to adjust our perspective and commitments. Let's take a look at the third reason, which is that we need great leaders because we live in an age of conflict. And we need leaders who can help us to manage those tensions and create unity and harmony. That conflict is evident in the extreme partisan politics that is becoming increasingly common in both of our nations. We see religious conflict is escalating, and there's more and more persecution of Christians. There's more and more aggressive behavior from people of various faiths and toward people of other faiths. We look at the widening economic gap between the haves and the have-nots, and it's getting increasingly volatile. We look at generational expectations where there's a wider and wider divide occurring between people simply because of their ages. We look at families, seeing them torn apart by divorce, and often that happens after there's been many episodes of physical violence or emotional abuse. We need leaders who can bring us together and create that kind of unity and harmony. There's a fourth reason why we need more great leaders today, and that relates to our values. What we need are leaders who can help us to realign our sense of propriety and purpose in life. People tend to take their cues from a very customized blend of leaders, heroes, celebrities, family members, and other intimates in their life. But over the last 20 years in particular, we've seen a massive shift in what we consider to be right and good and worthy and defensible. And so now if you look at some of this shift in values, we've moved from a nation of people, both of our nations, Canada and the US, from thinking that it was important to belong to community to now prioritizing individuality and independence. We've moved away from assuming that people automatically deserve respect and encouragement to a society of people where criticism is the norm. And often that's done in uncivil ways. We look at the fact that traditionally we thought you get ahead through hard work and tenacity at finishing your tasks. But no longer is that the case. Now people want to gain in the future through entitlement. You owe me. You should give to me. The government owes me. The world owes me. We have traditionally had this idea that it's important that you perform at a level of excellence, but that's now moved to settling for adequacy. We believed that it was important to invest in the common good, but now all we look for is personal benefit, private advantage, how we can exploit things to our own advantage. We used to be a people who planned and prepared for the future because we thought that was the way to make it as good as possible. But now we don't worry about the future, we demand instant gratification. We want it, and we want it now. And it used to be the case where we would pursue integrity because that's what made you a good person. That's what made you somebody worth listening to and following and helping. But no longer. What we pursue now are comfort and happiness and security, sometimes at the expense of integrity. All that has resulted in a massive shift that's taken place where we no longer believe that there's such a thing as moral or spiritual absolutes. Everything now is situational. It depends on the individual and how they choose to interpret and deal with their situation or their current conditions. We've moved away from the acceptance of personal responsibility to demanding our rights. We think that it's due to us and nobody should stand in our way, and we have no responsibility toward earning those rights. And increasingly what we're finding is that people have moved away from exercising values-based discernment to instead exercising values-free tolerance. Tolerance has become one of the leading values of the day in both of our cultures, and it happens to undermine our culture. We need leaders who are going to help us retain a sense of propriety and purpose in life. A final reason that I'll give you for why we need more leaders today is that we've had a relaxation of our standards. We need leaders who will not only evaluate the right things, but will respond wisely to the appropriate measurement outcomes that we have at our disposal. If you look at what's been happening, progress has typically been made because of the commitment to personally investing in growth and improvement. Today, given their selfishness and unrealistic expectations, people are more likely to settle for comfortable survival and the continuity of the status quo. Traditionally, the ideal was that you earned your way to success, but what we're finding out of our research is that the emerging generations are more likely to believe that success and prosperity is their birthright, and they do not plan for the future or work toward long-term success. We've seen that many people have reformulated the criteria for evaluation in life of what's meaningful, what is success. And the criteria have become things such as size and speed and pleasure and comfort. It's now unusual for those who recognize the need to pursue depth, despite hardship, to exist. It's hard to find people who believe that righteousness amid personal sacrifice and limitations is a worthwhile goal, something to pursue in their life. We need leaders who are going to upgrade our standards of evaluation. We could probably fill our entire evening identifying reasons why we need more great leaders in this day and age, but you get the point. But it does raise the question, but why do we need a program like Arrow Leadership? And my answer to that would be because we desperately need leaders who can mend what has been broken. We desperately need leaders who can fix things by restoring a sense of sanity amid the selfishness, the chaos, and the confusion that commonly prevails, and to take advantage of new opportunities in a reasonable manner. We need more great leaders, leaders who can speak timeless truth to people and who can make consistent and reliable decisions in the midst of all the conjecture and the assumptions, the outright lies, and the intentional deceptions that we encounter every day. We need more great leaders because it's only visionary leaders who are really able to convey a scripture-based understanding of humanity and world events and to respond to those kinds of events based on God's eternal values and to do things that honor him through a worldview that is based on his principles. We need more great leaders because they are the ones whose natural inclinations and instinctive response is to identify and promote and reinforce the biblical values that made our nations great. And we also need more great leaders whom people can confidently and joyfully emulate as viable role models because they're steady, they're trustworthy, they're transparent. I want to spend my few remaining minutes describing a few of the major challenges that these kinds of leaders are going to face, the kinds of leaders the Arrow is attempting to produce for our culture. See, beyond the conditions that I've already described, complexity, self-absorption, conflict, non-traditional values, and the relaxation of our standards, there's a wealth of crises in waiting for today's leaders. You know what they are if you listen to the news, if you just go outside and check out the world. You know that we're facing all kinds of daunting problems related to the economy, related to wars taking place around the globe, religious conflict, the scarcity of precious and necessary resources, the cost of health care, the increase of poverty, and on and on and on the list goes. During tough times such as these, people typically rely on leaders more than they usually do. They rely on them and they turn to them for hope, for guidance, and for wisdom. But interestingly, in my research, what I'm finding is that people are unusually reluctant to rely on their leaders today. Why? Well, as we did that research, we found out that one of the dominant reasons for that reluctance is because of a lack of trust. Our surveys are consistently showing that the public does not trust its leaders in business, government, education, ministry, or nonprofit organizations. What's happened is this has left people feeling more insecure, more anxious, and more fearful than has been the case in many years. But why don't people trust their leaders? And again, one of the major reasons that we're discovering out of the research is the perceived and sometimes proven poor character of our leaders. One of the great paradoxes of this age, I think, is that we scrutinize leaders more carefully than ever, demanding that they meet the highest possible standards of character. In fact, standards that very few of us would want to be held to. All of this happens in the midst of a culture that appears to be wholly committed to eradicating the moral foundations and definitions of such character. That intense scrutiny has become one of the occupational hazards of leadership. When a leader of some stature is found to have broken trust with the public, that immoral and unethical behavior makes the public angry and gun-shy. Naturally, even Christian leaders face moral and ethical temptations and trials. Through the Barna Research Group, I created a diagnostic tool that seeks to evaluate the calling, the character, and the competencies of individuals who are leaders. Based on more than 6,000 interviews with leaders across the continent, conducted with Christians in positions of leadership, I discovered that there are a few character dimensions in particular where Christian leaders struggle. One of those is consistently demonstrating godly wisdom. Now, as we broke that down and went deeper into trying to figure out what that is and why that's such a problem, we discovered that that largely has to do with knowing how do you balance worldly ideals and biblical wisdom. And in order to do so, as we went further in the research, we discovered that the leader has to be consistently listening to God and able to interpret what he or she hears from God in whatever manner God chooses to speak to them through a biblical worldview. One of the other areas, the other area that really jumped out as being problematic, is that of embracing leadership as servanthood. What we find is that that means always leading with love and compassion. See, I think we could take those two things. We could spend all night talking about just those two areas. But I want to summarize these challenges by saying that, I think what they relate to is our focus as leaders. And it challenges us to try to think through, in terms of our focus, are we other-centered or are we task-centered? Are we God-centered or are we self-centered? And the research shows that, like every other leader, Christian leaders struggle to get this right. That doesn't make them bad people. It makes us human. When leaders lose that proper focus, though, they begin to give in at the margins, just a little bit here, a little more over there. And over time, what happens is the boundaries of right and wrong have been pared back so substantially that virtually any act, any thought, anything can be justified. And suddenly there are no moral or ethical absolutes that are left. God, of course, does not allow that kind of behavior. Those whom he is called to lead who willingly lose their moral, ethical, and spiritual center will suffer the consequences. They lose God's favor, they lose out on opportunities, they lose out the capacity to influence, and they lose people's trust. I think the lives of David and Solomon ably illustrate that. In my estimation, one of the great benefits of the Arrow program is that it is slowly but steadily increasing the pool of available godly leaders, individuals who have been called by God to lead, those who have the character that honors God and reflects his principles, and individuals who have been trained in the competencies that will enable them to lead with God's vision, with humble confidence, and with practical skill and strategy. Arrow graduates are trained and tested in the ways of God and how to lead people toward a life that's based on the purposes and principles of the Lord. And while this in and of itself is highly significant, I'd suggest to you that Arrow is doing more than simply providing leaders who can restore and retain people's trust. That's important and necessary, but there are other things that are required as well. I'd suggest to you that the Arrow leadership program is also helping to develop leaders who are capable of fighting the onslaught of compromised Christianity. What do you do when you have a nation? And by the way, my data are only, that I'm speaking about tonight, are only for the United States. But what do you do when you have a nation that thinks of itself as Christian, but where among those who regularly attend Christian churches, you find that only 1 out of 10 of them say that their religious faith is their top priority in life, where less than 1 out of 4 of them would say that the most important relationship in their life is their relationship with Jesus Christ, where only 1 out of 5 of them would contend that the most important decision they ever made in their life was when they chose to follow Jesus, where you find that less than 1 out of every 10 of them has a biblical worldview, where only 1 out of every 6 even believes that such a thing as absolute moral truth exists, and that it's described for us in the pages of the Scriptures. When you discover that fewer than 1 out of every 20 are broken by their sin, or they're surrendered and submitted to God, where you see that only 1 out of every 4, when they bother to worship, are worshiping for the benefit of God rather than themselves, where you discover that 7 out of 10 of the individuals who attend those churches regularly say that they're more likely to develop their own set of beliefs than to embrace a set that's been taught to them by a church or some other community of faith. What do you do when you discover that the spiritual health of churches in that nation is measured by metrics such as attendance and budget and square footage rather than the transformation of people's lives? What do you do when you discover that the moral attitudes and behaviors of these people who are attending church on a regular basis are virtually identical to the morals and the attitudes and the behaviors of people who have flat out rejected Christ? In the 7 Faith Tribes, a book that I wrote about these matters, I separated the Christian population into 2 camps, and I call them the casual Christians and the captive Christians. Hopefully you can pretty much tell by those labels what each of those groups represents. But here's the point I wanted to make about that. Not only was the casual Christian population several times greater than that of the captive Christian population, about 5 times greater. What we also discovered is that it's the casual Christian population that's growing in number while the other shrinks. What is it going to take to restore the body of Christ to its biblical roots and to practices and perspectives that please and honor God? I'd posit that it's going to take a cadre of strong leaders who not only have that calling to lead from God and the character to withstand the pressure to compromise and the competencies to bring about strategic renewal, but also leaders who have a deep and passionate commitment to enabling the church that exists in our lifetime to become a much better reflection of the church that Jesus Christ died for on that cross. With all due respect to those who preach, turning things around is going to take a lot more than an increase in good sermons. Teaching is a very valuable tool in this fight, but no war has ever been won by teachers. With all due respect to those who run congregational activities, turning things around is going to take more than an increase in the number of programs available to people in our churches. Programs can help realign people's heads and hearts, but no war has ever been won through more diverse programming. In fact, no war has ever been won without leaders motivating, mobilizing, and directing people to carry out a compelling vision of a better future. And make no mistake about it, the Church of Christ today is at war. We're at war against a clever and relentless adversary. It will take the combined efforts of all of the men and women whom God has called into leadership to devote themselves to pursuing the unique vision for the future that God has entrusted to each one of them. But we come back to that question. Who's going to prepare them to do that? I have to tell you again, based on our research, it's not being done by our colleges and universities. It's not going to be done by the media. And our research shows that it's not going to be done by our seminaries and Bible colleges. The primary reason I carved several days out of my schedule to come up here was to take the opportunity to thank Arrow leadership for its commitment to developing a greatly needed resource, godly leaders, and to encourage them to continue to pursue the vision that God has given to Arrow. What they do matters. What they do is biblical. What they do meets an urgent need. After more than 30 years of conducting research on various facets of the human experience and having the privilege of worked with many of the great leaders around the world over those last 30 years, I've arrived at several conclusions about leadership and the human experience. Some of those conclusions are, for instance, the fact that no organization or community can go beyond where its leaders can take them. Or the perspective that lasting, positive change is not likely to occur unless it's connected to a compelling vision from God, championed by competent leaders. Or that no genuine leader is capable of facilitating meaningful change without the calling and the blessing of God. Each of us in this room, whether you're a leader or not, is responsible for playing a small but very important and necessary role in the expansion of the kingdom of God, taking cues from the godly leaders around us and using our own abilities and resources to help advance the cause of Christ. I'm proud to be a supporter of Arrow, and I'm thankful that each of you has turned out here tonight to demonstrate your support or interest as well. We need leaders who have been called by God to serve. We need more leaders who have Christ-like character. We need leaders who excel in the core leadership competencies and who are deeply committed to a vision from God. Thank you, Arrow, for what you do. Thank you, supporters of Arrow, for enabling them to do that. And may God help each one of us to be a source of enduring light in an increasingly dark world. May God bless each one of you. Thank you.